Welcome to Southeast Asia, a vibrant region made up of 11 diverse countries. But behind the beauty, culture, and rich history lies a powerful contrast that might just surprise you. In this corner of the world, you'll find one of the wealthiest nations on the planet, Singapore. A tiny island city-state with limited land, no natural resources, and a population smaller than many American cities. Yet it's a global economic powerhouse. Now here's the twist. In the same region, you'll also find countries that are still struggling with poverty. One of them is the Philippines. And here's where the story gets really interesting. The Philippines was once richer than Singapore. Let that sink in. At one point in history, the Philippines had a stronger economy and was better positioned for long-term success. The two countries may have started the race with different shoes, but they were on the same track. And yet, today, Singapore is soaring in the skies, while the Philippines is still trying to catch up. So what happened? Why does Singapore shine while the Philippines struggles? To understand this dramatic turn of events, we need to rewind the clock and take a look at some key moments in Philippine history. Let's start with something that speaks volumes about a country's economy: its currency. Today, one US dollar equals around 55 to 56 Philippine pesos. But would you believe that nearly 60 years ago, the peso was almost equal to the US dollar? Back in the early 1960s, during the presidency of Diosdado Macapagal, the exchange rate was just 2 pesos to 1 US dollar. That was a time when the Philippine peso held real weight in the global economy. Why does this matter? Because the US dollar is more than just paper money. It's the world's reserve currency. It's the benchmark for comparing every other currency out there. So when your currency is close in value to the dollar, that's a sign of a strong and competitive economy. For the Philippines, that strength didn't last. By the time the Marcos regime took hold, the peso started to decline, from 2 to 3.7 pesos per dollar, and then further and further still. And here's the painful truth: it never recovered. Today, it sits around 56 pesos to a dollar, and that decline isn't just a number. It tells a story of a nation that has struggled to grow economically while others surged ahead. But currency is just the beginning. If you really want to measure a country's wealth, look at GDP per capita, or gross domestic product per person. It tells you how much economic value the country produces, on average for each individual. The higher the number, the more productive, and usually the more prosperous the people are. So how do Singapore and the Philippines compare? Well, buckle up. Singapore's GDP per capita is around $91,000. That's among the highest, not just in Asia, but in the entire world. No, this doesn't mean every Singaporean is walking around with $91,000 in their bank account. It's an average based on total economic output divided by population. Some spend less, some much more. But what it shows is a high-performing economy with efficient governance and strong global trade. Now let's look at the Philippines. Its GDP per capita is just about $4,017. That's not a gap, that's a canyon. So, what gives? How did one country rise so high while the other lagged behind? What went right for Singapore, and what went wrong for the Philippines? The difference wasn't just about money. It was about vision, leadership, policy decisions, and national priorities. Singapore bet on education, clean governance, technology, and global trade. Meanwhile, the Philippines faced decades of political instability, corruption, brain drain, and economic mismanagement. Of course, that's not the end of the story. The Philippines still has enormous potential: a young population, natural resources, a strategic location, and a growing tech-savvy workforce. So the real question is, can it still rise? Or is it too late? And how does it compare? not just to Singapore, but to its other Southeast Asian neighbors like Malaysia, Vietnam, or Thailand. Stay tuned, because in the next chapter we're breaking that down. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think is holding the Philippines back? Or is the comeback already beginning? Indonesia has a GDP per capita of $5,051, while Thailand has about $7,073. These three Southeast Asian nations, Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines, have a lot in common. Their economies all rely heavily on natural resources. They share similar climates, rich lands, and access to the ocean. Geographically, they are almost the same. And yet, somehow, the Philippines seems to be left behind. Why is that? Why is it that a country as beautiful and resource-rich as the Philippines remains poor, even after so many years of independence? The country has mountains full of minerals, lush lands for agriculture, oceans filled with marine life, and millions of hard-working, talented people. So what went wrong? To better understand this, let's take a different comparison. Singapore. Just like the Philippines, Singapore was once colonized. In fact, both nations suffered under foreign control. Singapore was ruled by the British, while the Philippines had to endure colonization by Spain, the United States, and even Japan. Both countries emerged from colonial rule, bruised and broken. They had to rebuild from scratch. In other words, they both started near the bottom. But what happened next is what makes the difference. After gaining independence, both countries had the same goal: to develop, to grow, and to uplift their people. But they didn't get the same results. Singapore soared. The Philippines struggled. Why? The short answer is this: governance. Singapore had Lee Kuan Yew. The Philippines had Manuel Roxas. Now, Emilio Aguinaldo was technically the first president of the Philippines, but Manuel Roxas was the first post-independence president. Singapore and the Philippines both had their own leaders from among their own people. But the quality and the actions of those leaders made all the difference. Lee Kuan Yew was determined to make Singapore thrive. One of the first things he focused on was eliminating corruption. He didn't just talk about it, he took action. He created the CPIB, or Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau, which was tasked solely with rooting out corruption. And it worked. During his time in office, corruption levels in Singapore became among the lowest in the world. He made sure that from top to bottom, government employees were held accountable. There were consequences for stealing from the people. This set the tone for the entire nation. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, corruption continued to grow. Instead of being punished, corrupt officials were protected. Political dynasties flourished. Families began to treat public office like a family business, passing down power from one generation to the next. Public funds were often misused. Infrastructure projects were delayed or never finished. Foreign investments were scared away by instability and a lack of transparency. In 2023, the Philippines ranked 115th out of 180 countries in the Global Corruption Index. That says a lot. Another key reason why Singapore rose and the Philippines didn't is the use of a merit-based system. In Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew made sure that people were hired based on skills and intelligence, not family name or political connections. If you were competent, you got a chance to serve. That's why their government worked efficiently. That's why the system was trusted. The people knew they were being led by capable individuals. But in the Philippines, positions are often given to relatives, friends, or allies. This limits innovation and blocks fresh ideas. It also demoralizes people who work hard but are overlooked simply because they don't have the right last name. Over time, this kind of system weakens a country. It slows down progress and leads to stagnation. The truth is, the Philippines is not doomed. It's not a hopeless case. Far from it. The country is filled with promise. The people are smart, hardworking, and resilient. But until corruption is addressed and merit is prioritized, the cycle will continue. And that's the real tragedy. Not that the Philippines started from behind, but that it keeps being held back by the very people meant to lead it forward. So what can be done? Well, that's a story for another time. If you found this video thought-provoking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going. In Singapore, you can't just run for public office because you feel like it. You need credentials. You need a clean record. You need merit. Only those with an excellent educational background and a history of integrity can even qualify to serve in government. That's how the system works. It's not about who you know, but what you've done. But in the Philippines, it's the complete opposite. Anyone can run, from the smallest barangay position to the presidency. It doesn't matter if you dropped out of school. It doesn't matter if you have no experience. It doesn't even matter if you've been involved in corruption before. As long as you meet a few basic requirements and file your candidacy, you're good to go. Now, sure, that might sound fair in a democracy. After all, shouldn't everyone have the right to lead, regardless of their background? In theory, yes. But that's exactly where the problem begins. Because the Philippines has no strict merit-based system, the field is wide open. Not to the best candidates, but to the most popular ones. And here's the harsh truth. Even if unqualified or corrupt people run for office, it wouldn't matter if voters consistently chose the right leaders. But they don't. And that, right there, is the root of the problem. Again, I'm not saying all Filipinos make poor choices. And I'm definitely not saying the country never had good leaders, because it has. There are honest, hard-working public servants out there. But sadly, they're often outnumbered, outspent, and overshadowed. When you look at historical election data in the Philippines, one pattern is clear. Celebrity candidates, people with fame but no political or academic background, have a much higher chance of winning. Why? Because the majority of voters still equate popularity with capability. The election becomes a popularity contest, not a merit-based selection, but it gets worse. Not only do people vote for celebrities, they keep voting for the same people and the same families over and over again. Yes, we're talking about political dynasties. It's no secret. From the president to the barangay captain, political power in the Philippines is passed down like an heirloom. In some provinces, a single family has ruled for generations, as if the government were their family business. Want a real-world example? In La Union, there's a political clan believed to have maintained its grip on power for over a century. Imagine that, more than 100 years of political dominance by the same family. At that point, you might as well call it a monarchy. And these dynasties, they're not just powerful, they're rich, extremely rich. If you check the list of the wealthiest individuals in the Philippines, many of them are linked to political families. They didn't just win elections, they won the economy. So when people ask, why is the Philippines still poor? The answer is simple. It's not the land, it's not the people, and it's certainly not the resources. It's the leadership, or rather, the lack of it. The Philippines has everything it needs to become a wealthy nation. It has mineral-rich mountains, fertile agricultural lands, world-class beaches, access to international waters, and a global diaspora of talented and hard-working Filipinos. It even has a high number of English speakers, an edge in the global economy. But the missing ingredient? Good governance. And good governance will never happen as long as voters keep putting unqualified, corrupt, or dynastic politicians in office. For change to take root, the people must demand more. They must raise their standards. But how do you make that happen? One word: Education. A well-informed population makes better choices. But here's the sad reality. According to the global assessment, Filipino students rank among the weakest in math, science, and reading comprehension, 77th out of 81 countries. On top of that, nearly 20% of Filipino children are not attending school or lack access altogether. This educational gap is what makes it so easy for corrupt politicians to manipulate voters with charm, money, or empty promises. When people aren't taught to question, they follow. When they don't understand how systems work, they fall for illusions. But imagine if every Filipino had access to quality education. Imagine if critical thinking became the norm. Imagine if voters demanded proof, not popularity. Things would change fast. Of course, corruption and bad governance aren't exclusive to the Philippines. They exist in every poor country on the planet. But look at the wealthiest nations in the world. What's the common factor? They all prioritize education. They invest in their youth. They build citizens before they build cities. And if the Philippines can do the same, if it can build a smarter, more informed electorate, then maybe, just maybe, this beautiful nation will finally rise and take its rightful place among the most prosperous countries in Southeast Asia.